Dr. Velthak had been studying alien life forms for over 30 years, but nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his screen that morning. The blue glow from his computer reflected off his scaled face as he stared at the impossible data, streaming in from Deep Space Probe Alpha 7739. "This has to be wrong," he muttered, his clawed fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The probe had been quietly watching a small blue planet in a distant solar system for decades, collecting samples and data about the primitive species living there. But this latest chemical analysis made no sense at all. The substance was called capsaicin, and according to every scientific model in their vast galactic database, it should kill anything that touched it, not just harm or injure, but completely destroy living tissue on contact. The computer had run the analysis 17 times, and each result was more terrifying than the last. Velthak called up the molecular structure on his main display. The compound looked innocent enough, just carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen atoms arranged in a specific pattern. But when he fed it through the biological impact simulator, the results made his stomach turn. Every known species in the galaxy would suffer immediate cellular breakdown if exposed to even microscopic amounts. "Computer, what's the projected mortality rate for this compound?" 97.3% across all tested biological frameworks, Doctor. Classification recommended as extinction level threat. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In all his years of research, Velthak had never encountered anything so universally lethal. Even their most restricted military bioweapons paled in comparison to this naturally occurring compound from the primitive world. He leaned back in his chair, trying to process the implications. This small planet, inhabited by creatures who hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel, had somehow produced the most dangerous substance ever discovered. Were they aware of what they possessed? Had they developed it as some kind of ultimate weapon? The communication system chimed softly, indicating an incoming priority message from the Galactic Science Council. Velthak's heart sank as he realized he would have to report this discovery. Within hours, this information would reach the highest levels of galactic government. "Dr. Velthak, please prepare a comprehensive analysis of your findings for immediate transmission to Central Command." The message read, "Classification level maximum security." As he began compiling his report, Velthak couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery would change everything. The galaxy had always viewed the inhabitants of Sol 3 as harmless primitives, barely worth monitoring except for basic scientific curiosity. Now it seemed they possessed something that could threaten every living being in known space. The more he studied the data, the more questions arose. How had this compound evolved naturally? What possible evolutionary advantage could something so universally lethal provide? Most disturbing of all, preliminary scans suggested the substance wasn't just present on the planet, it was widespread. Hours passed as Velthak worked feverishly to understand what they were dealing with. His analysis showed that capsaicin targeted pain receptors in ways that caused immediate and overwhelming sensory overload. For most species, this would result in instant system shutdown and death. The compound essentially turned the victim's own nervous system against them. By evening, his preliminary report was complete. As he prepared to transmit it to the Science Council, Velthak took one last look at the peaceful blue planet on his screen. Those primitive humans had no idea they were sitting on the galactic equivalent of a doomsday weapon. The transmission sequence initiated with a soft beep. Within minutes, emergency alerts would be flashing across command centers throughout the galaxy. Quarantine protocols would activate, military fleets would mobilize, all because of a simple chemical compound from a world most galactic citizens couldn't even locate on a star map. Velthak's final entry in his research log was brief, but ominous. Compound designation capsaicin represents unprecedented threat to galactic biological stability. Recommend immediate containment protocols for Sol 3. Caution advised in any future contact with human species. This substance could represent either accident of evolution or deliberate bioweapon development. Either possibility requires maximum security response. As the data packet completed its transmission across the galaxy, Velthak sat alone in his laboratory, staring at the readings that had changed his understanding of the universe. Somewhere out there on a small blue world, primitive creatures lived alongside the most dangerous substance ever discovered. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. What had started as routine scientific observation had become a matter of galactic security. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Velthak couldn't help but wonder what other surprises those mysterious humans might be hiding. The emergency protocols were already beginning to activate across hegemony space. Soon, the largest quarantine fleet in galactic history would be assembled and dispatched to Sol 3. The age of ignoring Earth was over. The age of fearing it had just begun. But none of them knew the most shocking truth of all. The humans weren't just living with this deadly compound. They were growing it, refining it, and consuming it by choice. That revelation would come later, and when it did, it would shake the foundations of everything the galaxy thought it knew about biology, evolution, and the terrifying resilience of the human species. Fleet Commander Nixara had seen many strange things during her 40 years of military service, but nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing through the observation screens of her flagship. 3 months of careful surveillance of the human homeworld had produced data that challenged everything she thought she knew about biology and survival. "Status report, Lieutenant Cora," she commanded, her eyes never leaving the tactical display showing the blue planet below. "Commander, we've completed our 3rd comprehensive scan of the surface. The results are disturbing." Cora's voice carried a tremor that spoke of genuine fear. "We've confirmed active cultivation sites for the deadly compound across every continent. Over 2 million locations showing concentrated capsaicin production." Nixara's mandibles clicked nervously, a sign of stress in her species. 2 million weapons facilities? These humans are more militarized than we estimated. "That's just it, Commander. They don't appear to be weapons facilities. Our long-range scanners are picking up what seems to be agricultural activity. The humans are growing this substance like food crops." The bridge fell into an uncomfortable silence. Through the main view screen, they could see the peaceful blue and green world rotating slowly below them. Cities sparkled with artificial light, but there were no signs of the military fortifications they had expected to find, no massive defensive installations, no fleets of warships protecting what should have been the galaxy's most dangerous arsenal. "Sir," the communications officer called out, his voice barely steady, "we're intercepting video transmissions from the surface. You need to see this." The main screen flickered to life with images captured from human broadcast signals. What Nixara saw made her question her own sanity. Humans were sitting around tables, laughing and talking casually while consuming what her science teams had classified as instant death. Children, barely past infancy by galactic standards, were being fed diluted versions of the deadly compound, while their parents smiled and encouraged them. "Computer, confirm that we're looking at voluntary consumption," Nixara ordered. "Confirmed. Commander, analysis of facial expressions and body language indicates pleasure responses during capsaicin ingestion." The tactical officer pulled up another transmission. "Commander, this is even worse. We've detected organized competitions where humans consume increasingly concentrated doses of the compound. They appear to be enjoying it." Nixara watched in horror as the screen showed humans cheering as one of their number bit into what her sensors identified as a concentrated capsaicin delivery system. The human's face turned red, sweat poured down his forehead, and his breathing became labored. By all rights, he should have been dying in agony. Instead, he raised his arms, in victory while the crowd applauded. "They're not just immune to their own bioweapon," she whispered. "They've turned it into entertainment." Lieutenant Cora brought up more disturbing evidence. "Sir, we've identified what appears to be a measurement system they call the Scoville scale. It seems to rank different varieties of their weapon by potency level." The scale appeared on screen, showing numbers that made the entire bridge crew step back in alarm. The lowest levels registered readings that would kill most galactic species instantly. The highest levels reached into the millions, representing concentrations of capsaicin that could theoretically sterilize entire space stations. "Look at this transmission, Commander," Cora continued. This human consumed something measuring over 1 million on their scale. He's not just alive, he's asking for more. The video showed a human casually eating what looked like a small red fruit while chatting with friends. According to their sensors, that innocent-looking item contained enough weaponized capsaicin to eliminate a small army. The human finished it, wiped his mouth with a cloth, and reached for another. These aren't primitive beings, Nixara realized aloud. These are apex predators who have evolved beyond our understanding of biological limits. The science officer pulled up genetic analysis data. Commander, we've been studying their DNA structure. Their pain receptors appear to be fundamentally different from ours. What kills us seems to activate pleasure centers in their brains. Pleasure centers? Nixara couldn't hide her disbelief. Yes, sir. They've essentially evolved to enjoy what should be torture. It's as if their entire species adapted to weaponize their own biology. More transmissions showed humans traveling vast distances across their planet specifically to consume regional variants of the deadly compound. They traded different types like precious commodities. They aged and refined them like fine art. Most terrifying of all, they fed them to their young as some kind of cultural initiation ritual. Sir, the communications officer reported, we're detecting massive commercial networks dedicated to capsaicin distribution. They've built entire economies around what we consider the most dangerous substance in the galaxy. Nixara stared at the peaceful world below with newfound respect and terror. What they had initially dismissed as a primitive species had revealed itself to be something far more dangerous. Humans hadn't just survived exposure to galactic-class bioweapons. They had made it central to their culture, their economy, and their daily lives. New orders, she announced to her crew. Reclassify human species from primitive observation to apex predator monitoring. Institute Protocol 7 safety measures for all future interactions. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. Protocol 7 was reserved for species capable of galactic-level threats. Looking at the innocent blue world one more time, Nixara couldn't help but wonder what other impossible adaptations these humans possessed. If they could casually consume death itself, what other surprises were waiting to be discovered? Dr. Velthak stood alone in his sealed laboratory, staring at the containment unit that held less than a grain of sand's worth of synthesized capsaicin. 3 weeks had passed since the fleet's arrival at the human homeworld, and the reports coming back from the observation teams had pushed him beyond the boundaries of scientific caution into something approaching madness. Every regulation in the Hegemony Science Manual screamed against what he was about to do. The substance floating in the molecular suspension field before him was classified as a Class X biological hazard. Exposure protocols required a minimum of 7 researchers, full medical support teams, and emergency evacuation procedures. But the questions burning in his mind had become too powerful to ignore. Personal research log, day 847, he spoke into his recorder, his voice barely steady. All conventional wisdom suggests that humans should be extinct. Yet they thrive on a world saturated with the most lethal compound we've ever encountered. I must understand how this is possible. He had spent days perfecting the synthesis process, working with quantities so small they could barely be measured. The amount he had created would be invisible to the naked eye, yet according to every biological model in their database, it contained enough concentrated death to kill him several times over. The laboratory's emergency systems hummed quietly around him. Triple-sealed blast doors, atmospheric scrubbers running at maximum efficiency, medical scanners monitoring his vital signs. If something went wrong, the entire section would be jettisoned into space to prevent contamination of the research station. Computer, confirm capsaicin concentration at 0.001 milligrams. Confirmed, Doctor. Warning, recommended. Exposure limit exceeded by factor of 10,000. His hands trembled as he activated the molecular applicator. The device could place individual molecules with surgical precision, allowing him to control the exact dosage. Through the viewing portal, he could see the microscopic quantity being loaded into the delivery system. Beginning controlled exposure experiment, he whispered, more to calm his nerves than for the recording. The applicator moved toward his extended tongue with mechanical precision. Velthak closed his eyes and tried to remember everything he knew about human physiology. Their pain receptors were different. Their nervous systems had evolved along paths that defied galactic understanding. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive long enough to understand what made them so impossibly resilient. The moment of contact was barely perceptible, a touch so light it might have been imagination. Then, his world exploded into fire. The sensation began as a tingling warmth that seemed almost pleasant. For 3 seconds, Velthak allowed himself to hope that perhaps the humans were right, that this compound wasn't the weapon they believed it to be. Then the real effect began. Fire erupted along every nerve pathway in his body. Not the clean burn of actual flame, but something far worse. A cellular-level agony that convinced every pain receptor he possessed that he was being consumed from within. His respiratory system seized, cutting off his air supply as his body tried desperately to protect itself from what it perceived as a mortal attack. Vision became fragments of light and darkness as his optical nerves misfired randomly. Sound distorted into a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from inside his skull. The taste in his mouth transformed into liquid metal mixed with electric current. Through the haze of agony, some detached part of his scientific mind continued to observe and record. His heart rate had spiked to dangerous levels. Body temperature was rising rapidly. The pain scale measurements were off the charts, registering levels that should have triggered unconsciousness. Minutes stretched into eternities. His body convulsed against the restraining field he had activated as a safety measure. Sweat poured from his skin, carrying away precious electrolytes and threatening his biochemical balance. Yet somehow, impossibly, he remained conscious and aware throughout the ordeal. When the torture finally began to subside after 17 standard minutes, Velthak found himself gasping on the laboratory floor, his emergency medical systems beeping frantically around him. His throat felt like he had swallowed molten steel. His eyes streamed with tears that did nothing to wash away the burning sensation. Personal log, he croaked when he could finally speak again. The humans are not immune to capsaicin. They experience the same biological response we do. The difference is that they have somehow learned to interpret this agony as pleasure. The full implications of this realization crashed over him like a wave. As he struggled to his feet, supported by the laboratory's medical systems, Velthak began to understand the true nature of what they were dealing with. The humans hadn't evolved immunity to the galaxy's deadliest compound. They had evolved the psychological framework to enjoy it. Computer, analyze my exposure dose against human consumption data. Analysis complete, Doctor. Your test dose represents approximately 0.01% of average human recreational consumption. The numbers hit him like a physical blow. What had nearly killed him wouldn't even register as mild by human standards. A typical human meal contained capsaicin levels that would require medical evacuation for any other known species. Additional, note for the record, he gasped, still fighting waves of residual pain. Humans don't just survive exposure to galactic-class biological weapons. They consume them in quantities that suggest either complete adaptation or— He paused, afraid to voice the thought that was forming. Or they represent a form of life so fundamentally different from our understanding that our entire framework of biology may be obsolete. As the medical systems continued their work, stabilizing his vital signs and flushing the remaining capsaicin from his system, Velthak stared at the human homeworld through his laboratory's viewport. What other impossible tolerances did these creatures possess? What other substances that would kill the rest of the galaxy did they consider normal parts of daily life? The experiment had answered one question, but raised 1,000 others. The humans weren't just dangerous because of what they could survive. They were dangerous because they represented a complete rethinking of what life could be. Lieutenant Cora had been the fleet's top intelligence analyst for over a decade, but the data streaming in from the human homeworld was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Her translation algorithms had been working around the clock for weeks, trying to make sense of what the humans called their food culture, and each new discovery painted a more disturbing picture of a species that had turned survival into an art form. Commander Nixara, you need to see this immediately, she called across the bridge, her voice carrying a mixture of fascination and horror. The holographic display materialized between them, showing intercepted footage from human population centers. What appeared on screen challenged every assumption they had made about civilization and survival instincts. These are human social gathering places they call restaurants, Cora explained, highlighting various establishments across the planet's surface. But look at what's happening inside them. The footage showed humans voluntarily entering these facilities and paying their currency to be subjected to increasingly severe doses of capsaicin. Not as punishment or military training, but as entertainment. They sat at tables with friends and family, laughing and bonding while consuming what the galaxy classified as weapons of mass destruction. Sir, they've created an entire social ritual around voluntary exposure to biological warfare agents, Cora continued, pulling up more data streams. Look at this establishment in a region they call Thailand. The screen showed humans gathering around steaming bowls filled with bright red liquid that made their sensors scream danger warnings. The diners were sweating, their faces flushed red, tears streaming down their cheeks. Yet they continued eating while engaged in animated conversation, as if the cellular-level torture they were experiencing was somehow enhancing their social experience. Computer, analyze capsaicin concentration in that bowl, Commander Nixara ordered. Concentration measures 847,000 Scoville units. Projected mortality rate for hegemony species, 100% within 30 seconds of exposure. But the humans weren't dying. They were ordering second helpings. Cora switched to another data stream, this one from a region called Mexico. Commander, this gets worse. They've developed what appears to be competitive consumption events. The footage showed hundreds of humans gathered in an outdoor arena, cheering as contestants consumed increasingly potent capsaicin compounds. The participants sat at long tables, systematically working their way through varieties that registered higher and higher on the Scoville scale. When someone finally succumbed to the effects, writhing in apparent agony, the crowd didn't rush to help them. They applauded their effort and celebrated their achievement. They're turning biological warfare into sport, Nixara whispered, her mandibles clicking in distress. It gets stranger, sir. Watch this transmission from their southern region. The new footage showed what appeared to be a family gathering. Multiple generations of humans sat around a table, from elderly individuals to small children barely old enough to walk. They were passing around small red fruits that their sensors identified as containing capsaicin concentrations that could kill most galactic species on contact. The younglings, Cora pointed out, are being trained from infancy to consume these biological weapons. It's not just cultural, Commander, it's generational conditioning. The implications were staggering. These weren't isolated incidents or military training exercises. The humans had built their entire social structure around casual exposure to galactic-class bioweapons. They were literally raising their children to be immune to substances that could wipe out entire civilizations. Pull up their commercial networks, Nixara ordered. The analysis that followed painted an even more disturbing picture. Humans had created vast economic systems dedicated to the cultivation, refinement, and distribution of capsaicin compounds. Entire agricultural regions were devoted to growing different varieties, each more potent than the last. They shipped these biological weapons across their planet like trade goods, creating market forces that drove innovation in lethality. Look at this, Commander. Cora highlighted a particular data stream. This human facility is aging capsaicin compounds for years to increase their potency. They're treating biological weapons like fine art. The footage showed humans carefully tending to what looked like a laboratory, but their sensors detected no safety protocols, no protective equipment, no emergency medical facilities. The humans were handling concentrated death with the same casual attention they might give to growing flowers. Sir, we've also detected what appears to be inheritance practices, Cora continued. Humans are passing capsaicin cultivation techniques through family lines like military secrets. Some of these recipes have been refined for hundreds of their years. This revelation hit Nixara like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just accidentally discovered the galaxy's most dangerous compound. They had been deliberately developing it for centuries, creating increasingly potent variants through selective breeding and careful cultivation. Computer, show me their most extreme variants. The data that appeared made the entire bridge crew step back in alarm. Capsaicin concentrations reaching into the millions on their Scoville scale. Compounds so lethal that theoretical exposure could sterilize entire space stations. Yet the humans had names for these substances, casual names that suggested familiarity rather than fear. Carolina Reaper, Ghost Pepper, Dragon's Breath. Cora read from the list. They've named their biological weapons like beloved pets. But perhaps most disturbing of all was what they discovered about human travel patterns. Humans regularly journeyed across vast distances on their planet, specifically to consume regional variants of capsaicin. They had created tourism industries around biological warfare agents. They wrote reviews and recommendations about which varieties provided the most intense experiences. "Commander," Cora said quietly, "we're not dealing with a primitive species that stumbled upon a dangerous compound. We're observing a civilization that has spent millennia perfecting the art of consuming death itself." The bridge fell silent as they absorbed the full implications. These humans had turned survival into culture, torture into pleasure, and biological weapons into the foundation of their social bonds. "New classification for human species," Nixara announced grimly. "Apex predator civilization with mastery of biological warfare integration. Recommend extreme caution in any future contact scenarios." Looking at the peaceful blue world below, none of them could shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of human adaptability. If they could casually consume galactic extinction events, what other impossible capabilities were they hiding? Ambassador Jamin Park straightened his tie and looked around the impressive dining hall aboard the Hegemony flagship. After months of careful negotiations, this was humanity's first formal diplomatic dinner with representatives from across the galaxy. The circular table accommodated 12 different species, each one eyeing the others with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The meal had been going surprisingly well. The alien hosts had prepared what they considered safe, neutral foods that wouldn't offend anyone's biology or cultural preferences. Bland, colorless dishes that tasted like cardboard but represented a genuine effort at hospitality. Jamin had eaten worse at corporate functions back on Earth. "Ambassador Park," Commander Nixara said from across the table, her translator converting her clicks and whistles into perfect Korean. "We hope you find our cuisine acceptable." "It's wonderful, thank you," Jamin replied diplomatically, though his taste buds were crying out for something, anything with actual flavor. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small glass bottle with a red cap, the kind of thing millions of humans carried without thinking twice about it. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every alien at the table recoiled as if he had drawn a weapon. Two of the smaller species actually fell backward off their chairs and scrambled behind larger delegates. The insectoid representative from the hive worlds made a sound like air escaping from a punctured hull. Most alarming of all, emergency klaxons began blaring throughout the dining hall. "Ambassador Park." Commander Nixara's voice carried pure terror through the translator. "Please secure that Class X biological weapon immediately." Jamin froze, the bottle of gochujang sauce halfway to his bulgogi. He looked around the table at faces displaying every conceivable expression of horror and realized something had gone very, very wrong. "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, genuinely confused. "The substance you're carrying," the fleet science officer stammered, his scanner beeping frantically. "Our instruments classify it as the most dangerous compound in known space. Please, for the safety of everyone aboard this vessel, do not deploy that weapon." "Weapon?" Jamin looked down at the innocent bottle in his hand. The same sauce his grandmother had taught him to make. The same recipe his family had been perfecting for 3 generations. The same condiment that sat on tables in half the restaurants in Seoul. "Commander, this is just food seasoning," he said slowly, trying to process what he was hearing. "We put it on everything." The silence that followed was so complete that Jamin could hear the ship's life support systems humming in the background. Every alien face around the table displayed the same expression of absolute disbelief, mixed with dawning horror. Dr. Sujin Lee, humanity's lead xenobiologist for the mission, noticed the tension and leaned forward. "Is there some kind of problem with Korean cuisine?" she asked innocently. Dr. Lee, the hegemony's chief medical officer, spoke with the careful tone of someone defusing a bomb. "Our analysis indicates that substance contains concentrated capsaicin at levels that would be lethal to every species represented at this table." "Oh," Dr. Lee said, understanding dawning on her face. "You mean the spicy part?" "Spicy part." The words hung in the air like a confession of mass murder. "You're telling us," Commander Nixara said very carefully, "that humans regularly consume what we classify as weapons of mass destruction. For flavor enhancement?" Jamin couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of the situation. "Commander, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This sauce probably registers maybe 50,000 on the Scoville scale. That's actually pretty mild by Korean standards." The medical scanner in the science officer's hands began making sounds like a dying animal. 50,000? The officer whispered. "Our models show that anything above 100 Scoville units should cause immediate system failure in most galactic species." Dr. Lee pulled out her tablet and began showing them comparison charts. "Well, if you think that's impressive, wait until you hear about ghost peppers. Those clock in around 1 million Scoville units, or the Carolina Reaper at over 2 million. My nephew ate one on a dare last month." 3 more delegates fainted. "Your nephew?" Commander Nixara's translator was struggling to keep up with her rapid speech. "A juvenile human consumed 2 million Scoville units and survived." "Oh, he did more than survive," Dr. Lee laughed. "He posted a video of it online and got 500,000 views. Kids these days, always trying to one-up each other. The revelation that human children were casually consuming what the galaxy considered extinction-level biological agents as entertainment sent shockwaves through the remaining conscious delegates. Emergency medical teams were summoned for the species that had passed out from sheer terror. Ambassador Jamin slowly screwed the cap back onto his sauce bottle and tucked it away. "I'm beginning to understand why our preliminary cultural exchange reports mentioned some concerns about human dietary habits." "Ambassador," Commander Nixara said, her voice shaking slightly, "may I ask what other substances humans consider normal food additives?" Jamin exchanged a look with Dr. Lee. They had agreed beforehand to introduce humanity gradually to galactic society, but this conversation was revealing just how carefully they needed to proceed. "Well," he said diplomatically, "perhaps we should table the discussion about alcohol, caffeine, and chocolate until our next meeting." The sound of 4 more delegates hitting the floor answered that question definitively. Looking around at the chaos their simple dinner condiments had caused, Jamin realized that humanity's place in the galactic community was going to be very different from what anyone had expected. They weren't joining as junior partners or primitive newcomers. They were entering as the species that casually carried galactic doomsday weapons in their kitchen cabinets and considered them essential for proper seasoning. The galaxy was about to learn that humans defined normal very differently from everyone else, and frankly that might be the most terrifying discovery of all. The diplomatic dinner ended with half the delegates unconscious and the other half requesting immediate medical evaluation, but it also marked the beginning of a new era where humanity's reputation was built not on their technology or military might, but on their absolutely incomprehensible relationship with what everyone else considered certain death. First contact had been a success, in the most uniquely human way possible.